So this has kind of been a developing story, one that we haven't really discussed too much on the show. Obviously, it's understandable because it only occurs every 4 years. But even some of the buildup and the buzz is finally over. The FIFA 2022 Qatar World Cup Draw has officially been announced. Came out on Friday. Men's national team has qualified for the World Cup. Obviously, we don't have to dwell on the fact that they missed out on the 2018 World Cup, which we know the type of ignominy that they suffered after not qualifying for that and how they lost to Trinidad and Tobago in the qualifying game. I think that was the single most disappointing loss in U.S. men's national team history. Obviously, that was a soul-crushing blow for the U.S. men's national team, and it was the lowest point. It was their rock bottom. And so the fact that they've officially qualified for the World Cup in 2022, I think, is a huge sigh. We can all breathe a sigh of relief at this point as U.S. soccer fans. And the U.S. men's national team fell in the Group B, which is with England, a powerhouse, and then Iran and the European playoff winner between either Ukraine or Wales and Scotland. Ukraine's going to play the winner between Wales and Scotland. So it's only fitting, by the way, that the matchups are scheduled to take place during the two biggest holidays in the United States, between Thanksgiving and between Christmas. In fact, the U.S. and England are playing on Black Friday. Playing on Black Friday is when those two teams are competing, and it doesn't get much juicier than that. It's a zesty matchup. Earl Harter and Gareth Southgate, the head manager for England. England, of course, ranked number 5 in the world. And these two teams, there is a brewing history, a rich history that's starting to develop, a healthy rivalry developing between the United States and the team across the pond in England, especially in the World Cup. These two teams have faced off, even though they've only faced off in the World Cup 2 official times. They've played 9 internationally friendlies. Since that time period, England has won 8 of 9 friendlies. But when it comes to the World Cup, the U.S. delivered one of the best and one of the biggest upsets in World Cup history over England in 1950, winning 1-0. And then we all remember in 2010, the 1-1 draw between these two nations. And that was actually one of the best World Cup performances that the United States had. They advanced out of the group stage. They barely lost to Ghana in the round of 16. And listen, this is an England team that is extremely well coached. They obviously reached the semifinals of the World Cup in 2018 in Russia. They advanced to the 2020 Euro final. They lost painfully to Italy in PKs. So when it comes to England and the United States, it almost feels bigger. It feels bigger. Maybe it's because it's two predominantly English-speaking countries and there's more resonance there with people in the United States. You just get the feeling like the United States and England have matched up against each other a lot more frequently than they actually have. But that's a game that the U.S. can definitely win. I'm not predicting that they will necessarily, but with a high-stakes matchup like this, game of this magnitude against these two large, powerful, influential countries, you have certain players that I'll touch on for the United States that play in England. Obviously, Christian Pulisic playing for Chelsea in the English Premier League. So there are some emotional ties between these two countries. And then you go down the list for the other opponents for the U.S., the fact that they face Iran. The last time and only time the United States has played Iran in the World Cup came in the 1998 Olympics in France in a game that's dubbed as the most politically charged game in World Cup history. Now, that may change depending on if Ukraine can qualify for this tournament. But 1998, the U.S. and Iran, obviously, there were hostile relations between those two nations. They had just played after the Iranian Revolution, and Iran had attacked the U.S. embassy. So there was a lot of geopolitical strife going on between those two nations at the time. And Iran ultimately won 2-1. That was the only meeting between those two nations. So again, you get a round two about 24 years later. The U.S. should win that game. They're the more dominant team on paper. And then it comes down to the playoff game between either Ukraine or the winner between Scotland and Wales. Now, I'll say from a competitive standpoint, the U.S. has the advantage over all three, especially Scotland and Wales. But from an emotional perspective, if Ukraine was to come out of that play-in, it would be a really difficult game for the United States because the entire world would be rooting for Ukraine. And that's one of the beautiful things about soccer and about the World Cup is it's the ultimate galvanizing sport because it brings about the most unity throughout an entire nation, not just a sect or a fragment of the population, but the entire country rallies behind their nations. That's what makes it so special. That's why it only commences every 4 years. And so if Ukraine was to win because of the war that's going on in Russia, you just feel the world would be rooting for Ukraine. And it would be understandable. And I think that would be a difficult toll for the United States men's national team to overcome. I think that would be difficult. But when you look at this team from a talent perspective, yes, this is one of the most youngest teams that Greg Berhalter and the United States has had, but it's also one of the most talented teams that the United States has ever had. Because obviously, when you look at some of the most successful United States teams and you look at in 2010 and in 2014, you had Landon Donovan, you had Clint Dempsey, you had Michael Bradley, you had Tim Howard, you had Josie Altidore, who is married right now to Simone Biles. Congratulations to that couple recently, might I add. So those guys were all veterans. Those guys were seasoned professionals that had been playing soccer for several years at the major stage. And yet this year, the quote-unquote veteran is Christian Pulisic, and he's about 22, 23. Now, the talent level, you could argue, is a lot higher. Because you have Christian Pulisic over at Chelsea. You have Weston McKennie playing for Juventus. You have Giovanni Reina playing for Dortmund in the Bundesliga. You've got Sergino Dest playing for Barcelona. So it doesn't, obviously, all that talent doesn't translate necessarily to wins, but it adds a lot more credibility and kind of validity to and prominence to the United States men's national team. You feel a lot better going into the tournament. And that's kind of the difference, is the hunger and the true desire, the burning desire to win seems to be the difference between this makeup and previous editions and iterations of the United States men's national team. This team seems a lot more hungry, a lot more prideful, and they're going to need it. Because it's funny, because we think about the World Cup and we think, oh, there's always new teams or new nations that are winning, that are challenging for a World Cup title. And there's only 8 nations that have ever won a World Cup. Only 8. Obviously, Brazil has won the most with 5. Germany and Italy have each won 4. And you think about the ignominy that the United States feels like they feel when they didn't qualify for the 2018 World Cup. I can't even begin to imagine the sorrow and how distraught Italy must be feeling, the fact that they couldn't qualify for this year's World Cup, especially given the fact that they won the 2020 Euro Cup. But that's for another day. So Italy and Germany with 4. You have Uruguay. You've got Argentina. You've got France, each with 2 World Cup titles. And then you have Spain and England, who have each won 1. Spain most recently in 2010. That was the last major kind of special run for the United States, even though in 2014 they did advance past the group stage, lost to Belgium. But needless to say, there's only been 8 countries that have won the World Cup. And obviously every time the draw comes out, we always want to look for the death group. And this year there are a couple groups that obviously are a little bit more difficult than others. Obviously you have Germany and Spain a part of the same group this year. But I think there are a couple other groups to keep your eye out on. Group H, very deep. You have Portugal, you have Uruguay, you have Ghana, and you have South Korea. Now, obviously, you have 2 elite teams in Portugal and Uruguay, and then you have 2 really solid teams in Ghana and South Korea. Obviously, Ghana's managed to make a couple deep runs in the World Cup. We saw that in 2010. Actually lost to Uruguay in a game that they should have arguably won. We all remember Luis Suarez ended up intentionally hitting a ball with his hand from inside the penalty area to prevent a goal in like the 90th minute, and it came up to Ghana's forward to have to make a PK in the 90th minute to send Ghana into the semifinals, and he missed over the top bar, and ultimately Uruguay went on to win in PKs, and that was the rest. But so that kind of poses an interesting group. But I think that the quote unquote death group, if I had to select one, it would be Group F. You've got Belgium, you've got Canada, and you've got Croatia. Now, Belgium is obviously ranked number 2 in the world. They are fantastic with De Bruyne and Lukaku. They're a really, really exceptional team. Croatia was the runner-up in the 2018 World Cup to France, and Canada just won the CONCACAF. They finished ahead of Mexico. They finished ahead of the United States. So for a group stage, that's a pretty loaded group in my opinion. But again, just happy that the United States managed to qualify, because it would have been bedlam and mayhem again. It would have been absolutely disastrous if they were to not qualify. Fortunately, they did. Cannot wait to continue to follow the World Cup in Qatar. That'll take place next November. But in the meantime, the United States can just collectively breathe a sigh of relief knowing that they have made the tournament. They've made the World Cup.